James Bond 007 on the Game Boy is quirky and goofy, yet a worthwhile discovery for any Bond fan. And a discovery it would be. This is a game with basically no fanfare or legacy behind it. I mean, just by seeing the stock-looking cover art and the very straightforward name, one wouldn't be blamed for guessing that this was a fan-made graphic posted on some message board in the 90s. I mean, they couldn't even come up with some variation of kill or die for the name. But no, this is a Nintendo joint. Published in 1998 as the franchise was still riding high from the success of the Brosnan movies. Just think, Tomorrow Never Dies was still in theaters when this was released. And yet, it disappeared from the ether seemingly from the moment of release, with very few contemporary reviews from magazines or websites, and nary any conversation about it since, with the possible exception of a few YouTube videos like this one. I was only made aware of its existence in the mid-2000s, when browsing the Bond fansite MI6 one day in my early teens, and I always felt intrigued, but never actually cared much for it. I figured it was probably a downgraded version of a real console experience. Even considering Nintendo's pedigree, I wasn't really expecting much. But I was gladly surprised when I realized this is an original game more akin to a portable Zelda adventure RPG than your usual shooter. Bond is controlled from a top-down perspective, as you roam around surprisingly large areas talking to NPCs to discover new clues and items to solve puzzles in order to progress throughout the level. There are only 2 face buttons to map the items you get, and there are even dungeon-like facilities that need to be thoroughly explored, have switches activated to open doors that ultimately lead to a boss fight. So, yeah, this is just like Link's Awakening. Except there's a noticeable lack of depth to the proceedings. This game is developed by Sapphire, with Nintendo only serving as publisher, so from the get-go it's clearly missing the polish and depth one would expect from a Zelda title. The combat is functional, but simple to a fault. Like I said, only 2 of the various items Bond gets can be used at a time, but no combination requires a strategy or gives you an advantage really. Button mashing usually got me out of every situation just fine, regardless of the amount of enemies on screen. And even if there's a pretty decent variety of weapons and items, none of them can be leveled up or improved on. And Bond himself doesn't learn any new techniques throughout the story. Even though resource management does become necessary in the last couple of levels, for the most part, I never really felt the need to change my usual combination of a health pack and a machete. Finding said items can be an annoying task in itself. Like many games of its era, some of the Zelda ones included, it is filled with what can only be described as cryptic bullshit. What needs to be done or what specific item needs to be used to get you out of a situation is very rarely clear, unless you go ahead and interact with every character and every wall and surface in a level. Since it's not easy to tell apart what's interactable and what isn't, there's a lot of guessing involved. And some solutions made me go like, how was I supposed to know that? Out loud, which obviously feels much less satisfying than figuring out how to progress by solving clues yourself. That's not to say there isn't any of that. Despite not being as engaging as other adventure RPGs, at its best, the game does have its fair share of rewarding puzzles and tricks. Finding out how to beat Jaws is super fun, and a nice callback to the movie. And finding hidden areas and characters by exploring the map can be gratifying as well. Interacting with characters is key to discovering these secrets. From the very beginning of the China level, you're encouraged, if not forced to, interact with every character that crosses your path, so you can find the solutions that allow you to move forward to the next stage. And though every location is separate, as in they're not connected by an overworld map, each is, in essence, its own open world. More often than not, I would find myself going from one end of the level to the other to solve a puzzle or get an item that will then unlock a previously blocked path. These gameplay components reveal the game's strongest point, the surprisingly ambitious world building. The developers made the most out of having an original story, and filled the adventure with fun locations and a plethora of new and returning characters. Every level has a vast array of characters that can be interacted with, and they're not all directly linked to the story progress. Some give you fun general hints, others talk about their everyday life, and others who drop little tidbits about the level, all of which gives them a very lived-in feel, not unlike the different areas in the Zelda games. Returning characters include Oddjob, who sure is doing a whole lot of talking for a mute, Jaws, and the entire MI6 team, who make an appearance on the second level with their very familiar traits. Bond flirts with Moneypenny, gets his missions from a very no-nonsense M, and walks around Q's lab messing around with some of his inventions before getting a gadget and being told to bring it back in one piece, 007. I can't do a Desmond Llewellyn. As a side note, I found the geography of MI6 hilarious. Q's lab is just behind M's office. I can just imagine her being pissed off at all the noise in the background while talking to the Prime Minister or something. The location choices for the levels also wouldn't feel out of place in a Bond movie or book. Things start off in China, where Bond battles the leader of a village who later becomes the main romantic interest, and finds out about a weapons ring hell-bent on conquering the world. Which then leads him to Kurdistan to fight off warlords, Marrakesh, where he deals in black market trading before playing in the casino, as every Bond stories want to do, and everything culminates in an underground base below a nuclear facility in Russia. And yet, despite all these familiar elements, I couldn't help but feel like this adventure was decidedly un-Bondian. And it's all to do with the same elements and mission structure that make the world feel alive and very Zelda-like. For example, can you imagine Bond running errands for local village people, like finding a hammer so someone can build a bridge? Or trading a chicken for a cat and then giving the cat to a guy with a rat infestation, just so he can give him a jewel that he then has to trade for night vision goggles? Well, that happens a lot here. It's a lot of mundane things that are necessary for this particular genre of game they chose, but doesn't really fit all too well with the IP they were given. The weapon choice is also very odd. Job. Yes, there are the usual pistols, machine guns, grenades, and rocket launchers, but at some point he also gets a literal magical mirror capable of deflecting laser rays. What? And a Captain American shield that protects him against Oddjob's hat. And for some reason, a machete? I don't know. It's even weirder because, at least in my case, this became my go-to weapon since it's so effective. And it's so funny to imagine Pierce Brosnan or Sean Connery macheting their way around baddies in a Tibetan cave.
No more foreplay.
It's like they gave him a machete because they couldn't give him a sword, and you can have a Zelda palette swap without a sword. There's an enjoyment from the first half of the game that doesn't carry to the last few levels. Even if it's relatively short, there's considerable padding by the end. The levels become more maze-like, and I found myself meandering around a lot of the time, trying to figure out where to go. And by the end, it takes an overall jump in difficulty. All of this makes for a considerably disappointing end to the experience, which is a shame considering how inventive and fun the first few levels are. That's not to say that this is a bad game. Even if it got a bit tedious towards the end, it carried me along on charm alone. It's seriously goofy in the best of ways. The Bond quips are more ridiculous than ever, and there are some funny references sprinkled throughout. And it's filled with silly stuff like having Saddam Hussein as a sub-boss only for him to get KO'd in one hit, and then pull a white flag surrendering. This might be political commentary, I don't know, I'm honestly surprised that Nintendo let this pass. So it was definitely worth seeing all the way through. As for why it failed to make an impact and why it's not more talked about these days, I honestly don't know. I don't know how much of a marketing push this got, if any, but I can only assume that it not being tied into any of the movies hurt it a bit. It might also just have been drowned by the massive popularity of GoldenEye, as most people who realized this wasn't a handheld version of that game just skipped it. And to a lesser extent of Pokemon, which came out a few months later and essentially drowned all the competition. Regardless, this was Nintendo's last shot on the franchise before losing the rights to EA. It might not tick all the boxes for a Bond fan, though I think those with a lot of love for the Roger Moore era will find a lot to appreciate with the goofiness. And it's not deep or polished enough for adventure RPG fans who can find a lot of better options, even from this era and this particular console. But it's ambitious in a way that 90% of the games in this series made with infinitely higher budgets and manpower are not. I think that definitely makes it worth a shot. Thanks for watching the video and making it this far. If you did, please like, subscribe and share, do all those things, and do let me know what you think about this game. I do want to go back and check the oddities of the Bond franchise. I love the big ones like Everything or Nothing and Nightfire, but it's so interesting to dive into the ones that kind of fell by the wayside. I hope you stick around to check some of that stuff, and do give me some suggestions as well. Yeah, if you want to see more videos I've made about other Bond games, check this out. And yeah, thanks for watching again, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.